The Selective Service System was originally set up by the 76th United States Congress on September 16, 1940. It gave the President the power to conscript men to military services. All men aged 21 to 30 were required to register for military service for a service period of 12 months. The Selective Service System created by the 1940 Act was terminated on March 31, 1947, and the Selective Service Act of 1948 created a new and separate system. If a draft were held today, it would be dramatically different from the one held during the Vietnam War. A series of reforms during the later part of the Vietnam conflict changed the way the draft operated to make it more fair and equitable. If a draft were held today, there would be fewer reasons to excuse a man from service. Some of the ways men were exempt from the draft during this time period was if the person was of importance or related to a person of importance, such as a senator or CEO. You could also be exempt from the draft if you were too old or too young. The draft also took consideration the religion and schooling. If you enrolled in a university, you would most likely be exempt from the draft, and the draft changed to the draft lottery in 1969, which made it a lot more random and a lot more difficult to dodge, but then this was later repealed.
Two-thirds of the men who served in Vietnam were volunteers. Likewise, two-thirds of the men who served in World War II were drafted. Approximately 70% of those killed were volunteers. The Vietnam War saw the highest proportion of blacks ever to serve in an American war. During the height of U.S. involvement, 86% of the men who actually served in Vietnam were Caucasian, 13% were black, and 1% belonged to other races. Blacks at the time had formed 11% of the American population. Vietnam veterans made up 9.7% of the generation. 9,087,000 military personnel served on active duty during the Vietnam era, which lasted from August 5, 1964 to May 7, 1975. 7,484 women, 83.5% being nurses, served in Vietnam. Contrary to popular belief, the majority of people involved in the Vietnam War were volunteers. However, the disdain Americans felt towards compulsory drafts implicated the majority of soldiers had been drafted. In the Vietnam War, blacks found that they were still not accepted socially as equals despite becoming involved in a war that was for the benefits of the U.S. This, too, after many volunteered to be drafted. Though a couple million men would be involved in the Vietnam War, less than 10,000 women would become involved directly in Vietnam, a number significantly lower than that of World War II, which would only further promote gender inequalities. Though most involved in the war had lived above the poverty line, the working class primarily fought the war along with the middle class. Skilled artisans and other professional workers found less involvement from the exemptions granted to such workers.
A major impact of the draft was the draft resistance movement. The most common draft protesters were college students. As a form of resistance, they would burn their draft cards, refusing to partake in selective service. Other students were able to avoid the draft through education deferment. Many people in their late teens or early 20s sought to go to college to be able to receive this exemption from the draft. New colleges in rural communities opened up as a result of the increased demand in post-high school education. Besides education deferment, people avoided being drafted by claiming to be conscientious objectors, homosexual, or drug addicts, or by moving out of the country. Out of the 209,517 people accused of draft resistance, only about 9,000 were convicted. The movement was so large that the government could not arrest everyone who refused to serve.